the Idaho organization, the Private Investigators Association of Idaho. We are really looking forward to Aidan presenting for us. This should be a really fascinating presentation. I am recording this meeting, so right up front, just let everybody know that. We will have it later on. If you want to go back and revisit it, it'll be on our YouTube channel. We try to maintain a nice library. We're growing a library actually of great presentations, so I highly recommend everybody go check that out sometime. If you haven't already, please mute your own microphone, and we will make space at the end of this for questions. I think, Aidan, you said you would like to take questions all at the end instead of as you go. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, great. Well, a quick intro to Aidan, Raney. Aidan is the founder of Farnsworth Intelligence. That's the name of his company, as you'll see on his shirt and behind him. He is a specialist in digital intelligence. He spends his time tracking down crypto scammers and dismantling human trafficking networks and teaching other people like us how to navigate the digital underworld responsibly, something I could definitely use some help with one of these days. If you haven't already seen it, there is actually a Fortune 500 article that just came out that features Aidan's work in helping to uncover a North Korean laptop farm, I think. Did I get that right, wording wise?
Yep, it's Fortune, and it's we infiltrated the farm actually, but pretty much.
Infiltrated the farm. Okay, so you infiltrated it by posing to be what?
Well, posing to be someone who wants to work with them as a front worker, allowed us to gather a lot of information about all their operations and how they're bypassing restrictions and other things.
Very cool. Yeah, so I was just scanning that article. Actually, I'll get the link and I'll share that in the chat if anybody would like to see that. It's a fascinating read. So I think that is all I have by way of introduction. Aidan, you can just take it away. We'll all mute ourselves and then we'll take questions later on. And once again, if you're just have hopped on here, please put your email into the chat if you would like to participate in our raffle, which will happen halfway through Aidan's presentation. And that's all I got for now. Go ahead, Aidan.
All right. Well, thank you for everyone who showed up. I really appreciate it. This is something I've spent a lot of time on. I'm sure I'll present it again in the future just because it's such a great presentation. But without further ado, let's get started. So this presentation is going to be just to make sure everyone can see. Thumbs up. We're good to go. Okay, great. So this presentation is going to be about the efficacy of using breach data, info-stealer data, and ransomware leak data. It's not going to cover the ethics because that is a whole other debate that can go on for days. And so we're going to focus on why it's so important to use this data. As like a data intelligence nerd, I'm going to explain it in detail. And a little bit about me. Of course, I've already had an introduction, but I prepared this little joke. Here's who I am. I'm the CEO of Farnsworth Intelligence, and I'm an absolute data intelligence nerd. So this is my thing. This is what I do. This is what I love. So I'm excited to talk to you about it today. So the first kind of data that we're going to talk about is breach data. Here's the contents here, but breach data is probably the most well known out of the three types we're going to cover today. When you in the news, when you see things like the AT&T breach or the Verizon breach or the national public data breach, what that's referring to is when a hacker or a hacker group breaks into one of these companies' infrastructure, let's say some of their file storage servers, and they steal and exfiltrate data. And then they'll often use that data for cybercrime. So maybe they're using it for identity theft, for cryptocurrency scams, who knows what it is, right? Maybe they're sending people emails and they're targeted phishing attacks. So, when it's first stolen, it's in its most fresh form. And that's usually we don't see it at that point. It takes a little bit longer. But when it does finally become publicly available and it gets to that distribution phase, which we'll talk more about next, it's legal for us to use once it becomes public information. If you were to directly take a company's data, of course, that wouldn't be okay. You could not use that data. But DOJ guidelines for any other tools that sell this data, like District 4, they state that as long as it's publicly available, it's okay to use. So that's where that's the step that we're going to use it at. And kind of the overarching theme though is that there's a huge rise in data breaches. Maybe 20 years ago you would have barely heard about them. You know, some of the first data breaches were super basic. They happened in Walmart parking lots with a van sitting in the parking lot and connecting to an unsecured network remotely and just stealing the data without any protections. But even though cybersecurity has gotten better, the money that you can earn from data breaches is so much that there's still a lot of criminals doing this, and so it has only increased. In fact, since 2020, the problem has doubled in size. And while the number of breaches has gone up, the types of things that they're targeting is also more sensitive than ever. They're going after financial services. They're going after telecommunication companies. They're going after healthcare companies. And so there is just an insane amount of really super sensitive, personally identifiable information in these breaches, and so it would be silly not to take advantage of that. Additionally, the number of victims overall has increased, even though the number of breaches has kind of stayed the same over the past couple years because of the types of companies they're going after. They're not going after small to medium-sized companies, they're going after large enterprises, Fortune 500s that have hundreds of millions of customers. And so in 2024 alone, there was 1.3 billion victim notices. That doesn't even necessarily include all of the potential victims. That's just the victims that have been officially notified. So there's potentially far more than that. And so can be said that essentially every American citizen, whether they're, you know, a year old or 80 years old, probably has information on them somewhere in these data breaches. And of course, that doesn't just apply to the US. This data exists all over the world. So it's truly a global data source. And so back to that timeline, to explain it a bit more, the data starts out as what we call fresh data. So a company will be breached, and this information will be completely like no one else knows that they have it. The company doesn't know, the victims don't know, cybersecurity companies don't know, and so that's when it's at its most valuable because no remediation has been done. No steps have been taken for people to change their passwords, to stop using the passwords that were found in the breach, and the company is not doing anything to protect customers' accounts either. And so when a breach first happens, it's never usually publicly available. It stays within these private groups that first initially hacked them, or maybe they'll share it to a few very trusted friends in their cyber criminal underground. And they'll do that and they'll use the data for a little while, and then they'll do private sales. So they're trying to again avoid the company finding out they have the data, the victims finding out they have the data. So they'll do these private sales, and what happens is often with these private sales is either the people who have bought it will then resell it to recoup their loss, which is when companies first find out it exists in the first place because they'll do this on public forums, or at some point, once the data is far less valuable, it'll then be listed for sale on public marketplaces. And public marketplaces are often forums that you can go to right now. They're on the normal internet. So, for example, breach forums is one of the biggest ones. Its current domain is breachforums.st, I believe. And there is a whole section dedicated to data breaches where people can freely download them. And if you have to create an account, but again, it's still freely available. And so once that information is out there and it's so freely available, then we can take advantage of it. We can download it. We can search through that data. We can look to see if maybe our client's data is in there. We'll talk about use cases soon. There's an enormous amount of them. But that's usually how the chain of events occurs. Now, sometimes in other situations, actually quite often, recently, the breach will just go up for sale right away. And this could be for a number of reasons. For one, the company could already know that it exists, and so the value just isn't there to sell it privately. The other thing is a lot of these groups, you know, their egos are very much a part of this for them. And so if they get a really significant breach, for example, like Change Healthcare or some other sort of massive breach, a lot of them might want to post that for sale right away, not only as a thing to boost their ego, but then it helps them in the community. They're seen as this this figure that can do these big things, and so they can do more business, I suppose, in their world. It's like going to a conference and talking about your latest hack to your hacker buddies, essentially. And so in a way that does occur a lot. So that's kind of the chain of events. That's how these things become publicly available. Um, and then the hard part though is that these are not easy to use files. They're not Excel files. You can't just open them and search the data. Oftentimes, what the breach actually consists of is a database. So usually like a customer database, or there was a recent breach from National Public Data, and so it was basically just their database of people's personally identifiable information. And so when it gets dumped, they'll either dump it as like .SQL files, which is the database file format. But then they'll usually convert them into text files. And these are massive text files, usually 10 gigabytes or more oftentimes. And so you can't just you can't open these files in Word. You can't, like if you see here, in this screenshot, nas.txt, some of these text files are 2 gigabytes in size. This first one is 2 gigabytes in size. If you've ever tried to open a 2 gigabyte file in Notepad, you'll know that Notepad does not like that. And so in order to work with this data, you have to use technical tools. You have to use command line tools that don't require the computer to display the contents of the file, which is really important. If they have to display the contents of the file, that takes up a lot of computer resources. But if it can just run commands against it without displaying it, it's much more efficient for the computer. And so there is software like grep, which is a command line tool that lets you search within text files or many text files for a specific keyword. So, for example, you could use a username or a part of a phone number or an email address or something like that. However, it's still extremely slow, and you're searching usually many different data breaches, ideally, to maximize the usage of this data. So that way, if they're in only one data breach, you'll still be able to find that data. So if you're trying to make use of this data, it's grep is really not the best option. And you can aggregate it. There is open source tools for aggregating the data, but then you run into the problem that all these different data breaches are also in different format. So I don't know if you could hear that. That was my dog. See, I told you. And so anyway, so these data breaches, sometimes they'll have the comma delimiters. So the individual fields are separated by commas. Sometimes it'll be different. Sometimes they might use new lines or tabs or whatever it is. And so you have to, when you're importing all these different breaches, you have to normalize that. You have to make everything fit into the same box so that you can take advantage of the efficiency of databases. That is really, really difficult and time consuming, especially over hundreds of breaches. Again, there was 3,000 breaches, over 3,000 breaches in 2024 alone. So if you're really taking advantage of this data and you're aggregating it and you're making it useful for yourself, that's almost an entire department's job in itself. In fact, some of the companies I'm going to talk about, they started as products internally in a intelligence or investigation firm. District 4 started as an internal product of a Proscient. It's a company based in Chicago, very well known due diligence and intelligence and investigations firm. So it is often an entire department's role just to make use of this data. And so there is solutions out there, and they range in expense and in what they can actually do. So District 4 is, in my opinion, the best one. Unfortunately, their prices are really high, oftentimes starting at like $6,000 or $7,000 a year is like the minimum I've seen for quotes recently. And so it's really not feasible for smaller PI firms, one-man shops. I'm sure a lot of you guys fit into that category. And so there is other options that have less data. However, they also don't have as much of the cost, right? Because they don't have to do as much of the work. So options like that would be Snusbase, Dehashed, Leakbase. Um, all of those costs under $400 for a lifetime license or less than that per year. And if you're only doing, 20, 40 searches a month, those are all great options. Obviously, you're not going to get as much data and you can't search it with as many options. So like you couldn't do an address search with a lot of them. You couldn't do a name search, but you can search the basics. You can search an email address. You can search a phone number. You can search a username. And so that's still viable. There is also Intel X, which is a decent competitor to District 4, and they are significantly cheaper. Okay, moving on. So where can this be useful? A lot of places, of course, especially anything that is online. So, let's say you're doing a background check for a company, a lot of these, younger people, it would be really smart to be looking at their digital footprint in addition to criminal record search, SSN trace, the basics, looking for through the sex offender registry, doing maybe a lookup on TLO, whatever it is that you guys do as part of your background check packages. Doing a search against breach data is a really good idea because if they, let's say, have a bunch of different email addresses and they only provide you with one, through breach data, you can find the other ones. You can find the ones they're using for maybe other activities online that you wouldn't want a company to not know about, right? Whether that's, a modeling career on certain websites, or maybe they're into something that is against your company, like company policies, like they smoke marijuana, and you find that on some hidden profiles, or they are doing much harder drugs, or they're posting really inflammatory or defamatory content online. You can find that by taking these selectors and pivoting through a tool like Ocean Industries that allows you to find someone's digital footprint from their selectors. So you start with breach data, and then you pivot from there. Of course, the next one will be skip tracing. A lot of times, especially for the really good providers like District 4 and Intel X, they'll provide you much more verbose data and sensitive data. So, for example, in a lot of these breaches, you'll find full social security numbers, you'll find license plate numbers, you'll find VIN numbers, you'll find driver's license numbers. And let's say you're doing car repos, or you're doing asset searches, or you're doing whatever it is with that information could be useful. You can start with, maybe you don't know any of that. You don't know that they own a car. You don't know that they own other vehicles. You don't know where they're currently located, or where that car could be, or where they could be located for being served papers. So you start with this, and then you could take those sensitive selectors and then put them through TLO, or a vehicle sightings database. I believe a bunch of those have that as well. And you can take those sensitive selectors and then expand your investigation. And then, of course, I've talked about online investigations, but a big part of this is like cyber stalking, cyber criminals, those sort of things. All of that it's all potentially, this is potentially useful for. And part of this is the data is global, and it's primarily going to affect people who are digital natives. They spend a lot of time online because the more accounts you have, the more profiles you have, the more at risk you are of showing up in these data breaches. So especially younger people and millennials, there's a lot of data for them in these breaches, but the older you go, and often the very younger you get, the less data you'll find. Okay. The next section is info stealers. So info stealers are definitely not the same as breach data. This is a relatively new kind of data. I want to say it's become very popular in the last 4 or so years. The threat of info stealers has increased over 600% since, I believe, 2018. So it's really become a huge problem. What they actually are is a specialized type of malware that is designed to exfiltrate data that is sensitive to a user, to a hacker server, who they can then reuse for cybercrime, or they could sell in its raw form to others who will use it for whatever purposes. And this malware is designed to locate sensitive information. So, for example, in Chrome, you have saved passwords, saved addresses, saved payment methods, which includes credit card details. You might have cookies that contain special keys called session IDs that let you get into someone's account without ever actually logging in, evading all the security systems that we're so thankful for, like two-factor authentication and multi-factor authentication. So it's very sensitive data that it can pull. If you have crypto wallets on your computer, it can pull the information from that. It also often pulls basic information about your device. So the installed programs, maybe a screenshot of your desktop, and like your system specifications. So quite a bit of data. And if it's pulling these passwords from the browser, you're getting a lot of information. You're getting all the different sites they're signed up to. However, there is another kind of info stealers. What that is called a full log. So you get all that information. However, there is some very basic info stealers that only collect what's called a ULP, which is a URL, login, password. So that is just basically the stored passwords in your browser, the saved logins for all the websites. So they'll pull that data and they'll sell it in really basic raw form. So URL, colon, login, password, and you'll see it often much cheaper than full logs because the value is far less. And then also another thing, let me move on here, is like where are we going to find these infosphere logs? It's not as simple as the breach data where there's a very kind of known chain of events where eventually it gets listed for sale publicly. Although it does follow the same pattern. The difference is that because infosphere data is so accessible, there's a lot of Telegram groups where once you get in, they do require you to spend money to get in. But if you can get in without spending money, which is something that we've figured out how to do, then you can scrape the data within those groups, and it's semi-public. So it's often a fresh data, so even better than breach data. The victim doesn't know, the companies don't know, and so oftentimes data in there. So for example, recently there was this huge hack on a crypto exchange called Bybit. When we were investigating that hack, because I was really curious about it, we found credentials for Bybit from less than 2 weeks ago, where an executive had logins to sensitive internal systems just in these channels. That data was just available to anyone within them. So it's very, very sensitive data. It's extremely fresh. And then the next step from there is oftentimes then they'll get sold in these bulk deals. So maybe it's for a specific country, like the United States or India or Australia or France or Germany, whatever it is, or maybe it's for a specific platform. So people are like super interested in data for Epic Games accounts or for Facebook accounts. So they'll focus on that data. And those bundles are direct sales. So we can't touch those. It's extremely legally questionable to do direct purchases of any of this data. However, oftentimes those big bundles of leaks end up getting packaged and then listed publicly on the same cybercrime forums where breaches get leaked publicly. So you can download large swaths of this data. It's not as fresh. It's likely been picked over many times, but it allows you to see what's been out there previously. And for intelligence purposes, that's still very valuable. Obviously, the historical data still is very valuable. And so you can definitely download these massive leaks from these cybercrime forums now that they're freely available, ingest them into a tool, which it does fall into the same issues as breach data. There's many different kinds, it's formatted differently, but you could still use it this way. And then as far as data solutions, right now there does not exist a freely available way to search this data, like without any sort of verification or due diligence. The data is just too sensitive. You can't go to dehashed and search steal logs. You can't go to snuspace and search steal logs. However, we do have a platform for info steal data, and there's a due diligence process, but you can search it globally, and there's over 19 billion records and over 50 million computers. And we're also working on something that's super affordable, that's akin to a SNUSpace or a DHAT that's specifically geared towards private investigators, small firms, small businesses. And that's going to be super affordable and budget friendly, just a few dollars per search, similar to a DHashed. There is also super expensive platforms more geared towards enterprise and cybersecurity. So, for example, Recorded Futures has an infrastructure platform, although there's no global search option. And then the only other existing global search option at the moment is Flare.io, but their prices start over $9,000 for the global search option. So it's really not feasible for a lot of businesses. So reach out if you're interested in that. Self-plug, I know I'm terrible. So to discuss the sheer power of this data, though, because it's not, I don't know, I want to make it very clear here the efficacy of this. You start with the selector. So let's say you have a phone number of somebody who's been, stalking your executive protection client, or you have somebody for a divorce case and you have their email address, or you have an asset trace and you have their email address. You start with that. You search it against global info stealer data and you find results for a full log, a few full logs, and they have the same password, but it's for different URLs, so different profiles. To me, that says, okay, that could be from one computer, that could be from one person. So you investigate, you get all of the log data from that computer, and suddenly you've expanded the entire case. You have all of the different, bank accounts they have logins to for your asset traits. So now you can go to the team during the discovery phase and say, hey, you need to subpoena these banks, and instead of subpoenaing 40 banks, you're subpoenaing five. Let's say it's the divorce case, and all of a sudden you have evidence of an account on Ashley Madison or whatever the new site to do affairs is. And then let's say it is a cyber criminal. A lot of cyber criminals actually exist on these databases because they themselves infect themselves when they're running the software, when they're testing it. And so a lot of times you can investigate people who are completely behind a screen. They're just, you can't see them. And this data can completely expose their identity. Um, so again, high impact use cases, there's litigation. This could be the difference between knowing whether somebody was doing something or not, even if there's no other physical evidence of it. Again, high dollar divorce cases, asset traces. There's a lot of like, if this works, it is the difference between success or not, and it can break an entire case. The other really interesting side of this data is competitive intelligence. If a company's suppliers are secret, this data can reveal those suppliers. If a company has a specific methodology that they use and it's visible via this data, that could be revealed as well. Another side of this is corporate due diligence. So if this data exists for a company and you're about to acquire them, or you're about to invest in them, or you're about to spend $100,000 on a product for them, and you find out that their executives are exposed for within this data, and that is a huge risk, and it's something that corporate due diligence clients would want to know. Okay, moving on. The third section, ransomware leaks. So this is a kind of a groundbreaking, I would say, section. I don't think a lot of people are aware of the value of ransomware leaks. They're not aware of how you can use it. And I also have to say, unfortunately, there's not a lot of tools for this. This is a very manual process still. There is no global search platform for ransomware leaks. So what is ransomware? It's a type of malware designed specifically to either encrypt files on a company or a person's computer. Think WannaCry from around 2016. And then it will ask for money essentially to unencrypt them to save your data. The other kind of type of malware is they will just exfiltrate your data. They'll take it, let's say from a company, and they'll demand a payment to not leak that data publicly. And this is often the type of ransomware leaks that you hear about on the news. So and so company was ransomed, and if that company now doesn't pay $40 million, all of our data gets leaked. That is what often happens with this. And some people do pay the ransom. However, a lot of companies don't. Either they can afford to or they choose not to. And so this data gets leaked. And where it gets leaked is the ransomware blogs run by ransomware gangs. And ransomware gangs are essentially just these cyber criminal groups that are actually operating these schemes, and they're actually handling the ransom payments and infecting the computers. So they're responsible for also publicly leaking the data, and so that information is on those blogs. Now, ransomware has started to trend down a little bit since 2021, which was at a really high peak. However, what's really interesting is through a new type of ransomware called remote ransomware, it has started to trend back up again. And I'm sure it will continue to and eventually reach above 2021 levels. So it's still a huge problem, and there is an increasingly large number of leaks available. If you see on this picture here, there's this how to download, archive, archive 2, archive 3. This is from Clop, one of the largest ransomware gangs. This site alone has hundreds of companies' data that is freely downloadable, not just a handful, hundreds and hundreds, 400, 500 at least plus. And so the amount of data is just enormous. It is ridiculous. Now, if you want to find a specific leak, because unfortunately, without a global search option, you have to do targeted approaches. So let's say you're doing competitive intelligence and the data from another company could be useful for that. You would want to look for, does that company have a ransomware leak? Or do their suppliers have a ransomware leak? Or does someone that works with them that could have data on the company you're interested in have a ransomware leak? And the way you can find out if those specific companies have a leak or not is through a tool called Ransom Look, which actually I don't need to click on it because I have it right here. Hmm, there it goes. So essentially, what Ransom Look allows you to do is it tracks all these different ransomware blogs. It keeps track of the leaks that get posted on them, the companies that are being attacked, and it can be used for monitoring. And you can set it up, even self-host it, to be able to find out where ransomware is being. Which companies are being essentially infected by this, and if your client is one of them all of a sudden. And so when you're looking for a specific leak, you'll go and say, okay, I'm looking for AT&T. So you look up AT&T, you find out there was a leak in, let's say 2016. I'm just making that up. But 2016 is when it happens, and it was by Clop. So you look up Clop's ransomware blog, and you go to the page on Ransom Look for it. And then you'll see these list of URLs, and there is a section for the blog. So you'll see the actual URLs for the blog, and oftentimes they're onion URLs. So they're on the dark web. You need to use a specialized browser called Tor to access them, but it is not hard to find out where to go. Then you can go to that website. This is one of them. This is a .onion URL. And you'll look for in these different archive channels, right? These different archive menus. You'll look for that AT&T leak, and you'll see a page that is just a list of download links, right? And that is essentially the entire leak. That is, maybe terabytes of data that has been separated into little parts. You'll download them all. You'll have to use a tool to merge them. And then when you open that merged file, it is the entire database, or not just database, but the entire server often. Because unlike data breaches, these ransomware leaks take every file. So, often even the folder structure is preserved. So let's say you're AT&T and you have a server on AWS, and you say, I'm storing regulation papers in here. I'm storing employee credentials in here. I'm storing I-9 documents in here. I'm going to also store our marketing materials, our internal documentation, our SOPs, our suppliers, our contact list, our client list, and our sales list. Now, with that data, you can do quite a bit. However, once you download it, it is extremely slow. So these are kind of some of the issues. So actually, I think I want to talk about that first. Yeah. So
Aidan,
so go ahead.
hey Aidan, would now be a good time to break for a moment for the drawing?
Yeah, sure.
This
Let
is
me.
this is fascinating.
Okay.
I do some of this stuff, but I don't do it at this level. I'm realizing just how um, not very deep I'm going. So I'm gonna have to go back over this and rewatch it for sure.
Yeah, I made sure to include all of what I'm saying kind of in the text on the screen too. So, and I
Great.
have a link for the presentation, so I'll be sure to link that in the
Awesome.
chat for people who want to read it.
Wonderful. And we'll try to grab that and embed it with our video as well. Yeah, that'll be really nice to have. Okay, Chris, you got
Hello,
a drawing for
everybody.
us?
Yep. Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Swan. Thank you very much for attending the training today. I am the membership chair for the PIAI, and I handle social media. So please follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Yes, that was a plug. So in the essence of time, I have an official PIAI cap with all your names in it and emails. And some of the gifts I'll send whoever the winners, I'll send a photo of what's available. But basically we have cap, beanie, t-shirt, mug, koozie, flashlight, notebook, pen, and coasters. So all right, first one is, drum roll, please. Michelle Lyons.
All right.
I know Michelle, so I can get a hold of her. All right. Got that didn't look good, huh? The first one I pulled out of there was somebody I knew.
Yeah, I should have put my name in there, Chris. I wanted
Oh, I
a
got
cap.
somebody from Czech Republic. Sweet. Peter Hochberger? Peter.
Yeah, hi. Sorry for that.
That's okay. I hope I can get
Thanks.
your address right.
Sure.
And last will be Mario Fazekas. Anyway, Mario, I will get a hold of all three of you via email and you can choose what you want. Thank you very much. And it's all yours, Aidan.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris.
Yep.
Thank you. Congrats to the winners. I need to get one of those PIA hats.
They're nice.
Okay.
I wear mine all the time, and I've been pining after one of the caps because I have the beanie.
There they are.
Very nice. Okay. All right. We can see everything. Everything's good to go. Okay, great. Okay, so kind of back to what I was discussing is that there is quite a few problems with this data. The first off is the extremely slow download speeds of Tor. Just kind of a little bit of an explanation of Tor without getting too deep. It's not a normal internet network. It's actually, it's kind of like playing telephone. So you'll start with one computer, and that computer will pick up the phone and say, "Hello, I want to send a message to the next guy." And it sends it to the next guy, and the next guy doesn't know who the original sender is. That's why it's anonymous, and that's why criminals use it, because through playing telephone, the person at the end and the people in between don't know who you are. And it does that 3 times. It plays telephone 3 times, and eventually that it'll get to the actual website you're looking to connect to, and you won't know where that website is, and they won't know who you are. And so without explaining too technically how that works, that means it's extremely slow because you have to send it over 3 different times. Essentially, you have to do 3 different hops, whereas normally your message gets sent much more directly and much quicker too, because it's not using this crazy anonymous network that encrypts everything and does a lot of extra steps that make it extremely slow. And the other problem is that the Tor network is open source in that anybody can set up their own little node in the network. But that also means that without people paying to set up those nodes, there's very few. There's only around 6,000 in the entire world. And there's, I think, millions of people who use the Tor network. And so there is a bottleneck in that there's not enough servers in between to handle all that traffic. So it's extremely slow. Downloading, a 2 terabyte breach could take months. I mean, we've literally had to set up some breaches to sit overnight for 20, 30 days. And that can be very frustrating if you're not set up for that. We do have a system that allows us to do it over hundreds of nodes at the same time. So we're able to get, 10 times as much download speeds, often even higher than that. The other problem is that even if you could download many, many, many of these different breaches, sorry, not breaches, ransomware leaks, you're not going to be able to operationalize it, to aggregate it into one easily searchable database like these other kinds of data, because it's not structured. It's not a database. It's not just the sensitive, passwords from somebody's browser. It's all these different file formats. It's PDFs, it's Word documents, it's images, it's videos, it's scans of actual paper documents. It's whatever file formats a business would use. And so oftentimes, you have to kind of use special software that can take unstructured data and turn it into easily searchable structured data. And thankfully, for individual breaches, it's simple and easy to do that. There is a tool. Now I'm going to go back here. there is a tool called Data Share that was actually created by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. They created it for one specific purpose, the Panama Papers, right? Which is this big, massive breach of documents from a law firm that handled oftentimes offshore accounts, helping people essentially launder money. And so the information within was extremely valuable for investigating global corruption and all sorts of other things. However, there was just an enormous amount of unstructured data. There is lawyers' documents, right? And so these are PDFs, these are Word documents, these are emails, these are things like that. And so they had to create some system for all these different journalists around the world to not only work together, but to process all of this unstructured data and make it searchable. And thankfully, they've made it available to everyone else. So you can take a zip file containing the unstructured data from a ransomware leak, and you can throw it into this, and it will scan the PDFs and turn it into searchable text. It'll scan the images and turn it into searchable text. It'll take all these different file formats and normalize them so that you can search it through, in this case, a search bar, and then searching for beneficial owner, which if you're looking to identify the owners of shell companies, that can be very valuable data. And so that is one really great way that you can take this very unstructured data and turn it into structured data. And for all of you who do FOIA requests or handle this kind of data, this is also just a great tool for other purposes. So highly recommend it. And also the organization that creates it, if you do use their tool, support them. They're a fantastic nonprofit and they do some great work. Okay, so now we skipped ahead. So I want to talk about some of the use cases, very similar to everything else. Although this one is especially powerful for competitive intelligence and lead generation. If you're a company that is trying to compete with your rivals and they get their entire client list leaked or their prospect list leaked, that is very valuable for lead generation and competitive intelligence. Because now you can do a targeted campaign to try to siphon off some of the customers who aren't happy with what they're receiving. You can undercut them in prices now that you know what they're offering their clients. You can find out what supplier they have that they're not telling you about through these documents. It's very, very powerful data for specifically that world. It's also very, very powerful for really difficult cases where you might not have PII. This is especially true for countries that are covered by GDPR, like the United Kingdom, Germany, and France. They get ransomed quite a bit, and oftentimes the local councils will get ransomed, like their local governments, and those governments can contain PII on people, even though it doesn't exist anywhere else. It doesn't exist for commercial databases, public records, online, or anything else. And so we've had cases, for example, in the United Kingdom, where it was specifically like this specific council. It starts with an L. I don't want to say which one, but it's a specific council, specific region, and it's wealthy individuals that live there. And there's no way to find anything out about who owns this house. There's no way to find out who is behind that shell company. However, through these UK council's documents, we found information that is about who is in charge of this building, who is actually taking care of it, because they still have to pay utility bills, they still have to pay council tax, they still have to, there are still police reports for the address potentially. There's data that exists in those ransomware leaks that is enough to identify who is behind that building, even though it was just not possible. It was a Russian oligarch, in case you're wondering. And so it does have some very niche use cases. So for specific cases where you have no other way to go, there's no way to get to this data, if you can identify that there's an existing leak for that specific area or company in that area or company that works with your client or, sorry, with your subject, that's where it can still be useful in targeted situations. Okay, let's see here. We're almost done. Talked about this. We've talked about this. Again, there's no existing centralized global search platforms. I would love that. Somebody steal my idea, take it from me, make it happen. Or I will at some point, because the data is just too immensely powerful for not to be aggregated or centralized. Of course, if you do want to make use of this data, we do have those retrieval services, so we can get it much faster than you could, and operationalize it for you in data share in a UI that you could use. Yeah. that's it. There was an enormous amount of information I shared today. A lot of it might be completely new to you guys, so go ahead and send over your questions. I believe there's a way we're doing it today. Are we doing the Q&A system? Uh, Hello?
Okay, are you waiting? Sorry about that. I was
Yep.
I had to take a call very quickly there for a second. You are now waiting for questions and people are sending them in.
Okay.
Okay, so the first one is word of advice. Well, let's see here. Yeah, okay, I'll pass that one along later because that's more of an advisory note. How do you look for other dark web resources from one gentleman? And then I'll just hand you both of these. Alonzo asks, what kind of breach data do you think is undervalued?
I would say like specific, like so breach data or just if it's just breach data, I would say breach data from companies who are very large. So let's say Change Healthcare had a breach recently. There is an enormous amount of PII that's very up to date. There are certain companies who must maintain a level of updatedness of customer records by law. One of those would, of course, be like banks. They have to have a domicile address, something that you live at 50% of the year or more. And so if their data gets breached, that address could be the most updated address for that person, even if it doesn't exist elsewhere. As far as what data in general I think is undervalued, I would say ransomware leaks and info logs as well. I would say even ransomware leaks even more. I think that there is an enormous amount of potential for that data. It's very difficult to operationalize it. And how do you look for other dark web resources? S- Well, there depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for to look into different forums or marketplaces on the dark web, of course, there is just an immense amount of criminal activity on the dark web, and there is search engines for it like EMEA and Torch that allow you to search a small portion of it. Of course, the problem with the dark web is the URLs are randomly generated and they're very long. They're a random mix of letters and numbers. And the thing about that is that it's impossible to scan the entire surface of the dark web, essentially. Whereas with the normal internet, you can scan the entire thing and essentially find out all the different websites out there and what's on them. And that's what Google does. They can obviously still miss some things, but it's impossible to do that with the dark web. So even when you're searching with engines like EMEA, you're going to miss some things. Search for other breaches, not just in Pastebin, but other, like if I also would like to search for other, not just in Pastebin, but other similar sites. So you're searching, okay, so I think that one's about, I'm just gonna rephrase the question. How do I search for other breaches, not just in Pastebin, but in other similar paste sites? I think is what you're getting at. There is actually ways to do that. So first off, I don't have it ready, but there is tools that essentially take these different paste sites. So there's like 30 plus of them. And they provide one single search bar that uses Google's custom search engine tool to search Google essentially for results across all the different pastebin sites at once. So for example, if you had an email address, you could search 30 plus pastebin sites and find out where the paste on those sites might be located. Of course, that relies on Google to index those pastebin sites, and there is ways for sites to disallow that. They could enable features that say, "Hey Google, please don't index my site," and then it wouldn't show up in results. So then the other option is to use something like IntelliX or another just like threat intelligence tool like Flare that has scraped paste sites themselves, not relying on a search engine because they're going to have more data because they are not going to listen to that, "Hey, do not scrape me" site. To that, "Hey, do not scrape me" Google flag. They're just going to scrape it anyways for threat intelligence purposes, which is iffy, but they still do that, and so the data is much more powerful from them rather than doing it on its own. Um, The thing is about, to be clear, I'm not a lawyer. I definitely not a lawyer, and I always recommend speaking to a lawyer if you're really concerned about these things. But this is an existing practice that has been around for around 20 years now. The companies that provide it, like District 4, based in the US, and their customers include government clients. So as long as the data is publicly available, so anybody with a computer could access it, it's legal to download and to access. Of course, probably check with your state laws. And obviously, I'm not a lawyer, but that is what I have been told. That is what the industry kind of standard is. So I would be cautious of scaremongering. This is not a criminal enterprise. None of this is frowned upon, I should say, in the intelligence community. In fact, they've been using this data for a very long time. Um, how about cryptocurrency investigations? You tackle topics regarding this. Um, I'm not sure if you're asking me if um I do like in classes on it, but if this data is helpful for it, I'll cover that. This is really great for cryptocurrency investigations, actually. Actually the two kinds that would be specifically useful are breaches that happen from any sort of crypto exchange. And then also a lot of times these small cryptocurrency companies they get breached because they have very little security. And so the cryptocurrency and market and the investors there and the criminals there are oftentimes exposed by their own negligence. And so there is a lot of use cases for that data in that field. Um, is there any I'm missing that are like really good? You know, that processing data from such a huge truth estimates. We can connect later, Peter, but one thing I will say on that topic that I forgot to cover is that for ransomware data specifically, if you're willing to sacrifice a little bit of accuracy, LLMs and the usage of these new AI technologies have made processing large breaches, large ransomware leaks a lot easier. Because what you can do is ingest it into something that normalizes it, that makes it into a computer readable content, and then the LLM can take that and allow you to ask natural language questions. So instead of looking for an email address, you could say, can you find a customer list? How many email addresses are there? Where could I find personal information in this league? What kind of competitive intelligence is in this league? And then it can take kind of its own little bit of reasoning, very, very, very basic reasoning and understanding of the data, and spit out results that could point you in the right direction. So when you're going through a massive terabyte size breaches, there's often thousands of folders, thousands of files. So that's something that you can do that's really helpful as well. Also has threads, posted, updated Tor URLs. Yep. Also darkfail.live, I believe. It's a project by Doing Fed Time, which is a YouTuber who used to be actually a dark web admin himself. Now he's on the good side, and he maintains yeah, Sam Bent yeah, exactly. Love that guy. He maintains a website now that has all of the different, major services and websites and forums and things, and it's up to date as well. It tracks to see if they're online. How would you take steps to integrate breach data into a life cycle program? Not really sure what you refer by a life cycle program, but if you're a small organization, I'd recommend using a budget-friendly service. So something like Snusbase, Dhash, Leakbase. You're not going to get as expansive search options. You're not going to get as much data. However, you're going to get the value of having breach data, which is that in the case you search an email address, you're still going to get results. You're still going to find data. So it's still very helpful to bolster your capacities. Um, what information about someone do you look for if you hit a dead end? Um, well, breach data doesn't always work. It's just like any other tool. You could search, especially in cases like a lot of like if you're doing insurance cases, you're investigating maybe an older gentleman or a woman, and they're 60 or 70 years old, they might not have anything in this breach data. They might not exist in these digital data sets because they do not have the same footprint. They might only use their computer to talk to their nieces and nephews and watch the news. And so there's just no accounts for them to get breached through. There's no information out there for them. So unfortunately, that's just the dead end. That's the end of it. Then you have to focus on where could they be? Could they be in healthcare systems? Like, could they be in the Change Healthcare a leak? And maybe you need to be more targeted. Maybe you need to go beyond breach data to focus on things like ransomware leaks for specific things, or maybe like we talked about earlier, specific targeted regional leaks for like councils or local governments. Police agencies and libraries and hospitals, all these local businesses often get breached. Um,
That's a great idea. I like that about the local businesses.
yeah. Am I missing anything?
I think somebody's unmuted here. Went ahead. Now. I am not seeing any further questions come through.
I did want to mention something actually about James's comment. He mentioned make sure you have a good do a cybersecurity review of your organization's system processes and data handling / security policies. I would specifically the reason I recommend hiring an expert or something to handle the ransomware leaks and infrastructure data is that unlike data breaches, where oftentimes you can get it for cheap through a service and then not have to worry about cybersecurity risks, if you're downloading that data raw, it could be infected. You could be downloading malware onto your device that they have specifically included for people who download the ransomware leaks, or who are downloading these big dumps from breach forums. You have no idea what you're looking at. You have no idea if the breach of 800 million serial logs from breach forums is real. You don't know how to validate it and make sure it's real. There's a lot of risk involved with also downloading these random zip files. We have a compartmentalized system. We have a bunch of stuff we use to protect it. Oftentimes we'll ship physical drives versus sending things over the air to avoid any sort of issues with download speeds or anything like that. Like, we're set up for that. But again, specifically regarding security, to be extremely careful. These things can contain malware. It's not something you should just go willy-nilly, downloading.
Yeah,
Okay.
good warning. Good warning. Aidan, is your Farnsworth intelligence platform, is it up and running and ready to use?
Yeah, I can show you it right now.
I'd love to see it. How long would it take to do a quick demo?
2 minutes. Let me just stop sharing my screen and open it up.
All right, perfect.
Okay, I'm ready. Let me share my screen. So this is specifically this is the infrastructure data platform. We do have some data breaches as well, although it's more akin to, I would say, like the level of, oh, I think I paused that in accident. There it goes. And I think it's more akin to level of like a dhash or a snusbase, or primary focus is infrastructure data. So what I did here is I did a search for test.org, just a domain name. Obviously, we're going to find some results in breach data. However, the more interesting data is of course info stealers. So these are actually full log. So if I click on this I symbol, this is the computer ID, and then I can zoom into this computer ID, and I can get all of the data from that device. And in the results, you can see that there is also sort of interesting URLs here. Who knows? These could be internal URLs. These could be very important. And then heap infected, these are the ULPs. So this is the most basic data. That's also why you don't see comp ID, because there's no full log. But this is still very valuable data, and it's still good that we have this. And so obviously like this is an authentication portal, so this could be very sensitive. So it's very powerful data. And then if I go into this specific computer, we can see that I think this is Kenya. I'm not entirely sure the top of my head. And then this is the IP address. We can see all the different URLs that this device has for saved passwords. So it might be Kenya.
Wow.
Yeah. So really powerful.
That's so you just to to make sure I'm understanding this. These are saved passwords and you related to URLs that this particular machine has visited
Yes, so this is
and
someone's
has passwords on.
yes, this is someone's saved passwords. So this is potentially all the different accounts that are important to them that they use on a regular basis. So this could be your
But
bank account. This could be your and this is all publicly available. Just to remind you, none of this is some hidden marketplace we're getting it from. This is just open to anyone to download from Telegram and from breach forums and these different sources. And it's just out there. And so whether we aggregate it or not, it could be used. So the next thing is cookies. This is also interesting. So I'm gonna try to not show too much of this because I don't know I don't have a way to censor this tab right now. But essentially, the cookies could contain a few different things. They can contain oftentimes names. So like Microsoft Office cookies contain your name for your Microsoft Office account in the cookie. Facebook cookies contain your Facebook user ID, which actually goes to your profile. You can find somebody's profile from the user ID. So we have a way to pull those out too through AI. So if it detects those specific cookies, it can pull out those specific selectors. But those cookie values, I don't want to spend too much time looking at that page, but it is essentially also a way for you to access accounts without having to go through two-factor authentication or a multi-factor authentication. There is no process for that. Once you have a session ID, it is how your computer can stay signed in over time. So that's why you have to click save or keep me signed in or remember me, because it's actually telling the computer, hey, save a session ID and keep it and don't let it expire for 30 days. So it'll continue to work for 30 days. So if I wanted to log into that account with that session ID, I could. I could find a computer that's in around the same region as you are, so it doesn't raise any red flags, maybe the same town or city. And then all I have to do is connect to the website from that computer and put in the session cookie. And obviously, that's what cyber criminals are doing. They're using this data for that purpose to access accounts. In fact, most data breaches actually happen because of infostealer data. That is a lot of the causes for it. So monitoring for this, keeping track of companies' risk for this is super important. In fact, you can enable monitoring on here. So I'll go into, let's do test.org since that's one we were just looking at. Sorry, my account is really slow. I have put a lot of crap on here, so it takes a while. I have a lot of websites. So once we go into here, obviously companies with a lot more data, you'll see a lot more results here. But what we've actually done is we've separated out the data. So staff cookies are separated, sorry, staff information is separated from user information. So you could also use this to keep your users safe if you're like a platform that has online accounts, right? You can monitor for users being infected, then notify them or force reset their passwords or things like that. But of course, that's also helpful for when you're trying to do monitoring. Oftentimes you don't care about the user side. But this person, this might be a sensitive employee. And so you'll get an alert in your email when this pops up, when this new information pops up. And we're ingesting over 1 million of these records a month. So we're continuing to get more data. It's not just historical data. We monitor for additional data. That's the core product is cybersecurity. And so essentially, you'll be able to see the date that they were infected by, and then this is also another source ID column. And then you have the same thing with ULPs. You can see all the different ULPs. And something that's also very interesting is personal info. So you can use this for like executive protection. We have a few family offices who use this. And essentially you can add their personal emails. Sorry, my microphone stand is blocking the screen. There we go. So you can go into the identifiers tab and you can add their personal emails and their personal selectors And so that way you can monitor personal accounts as well, but which is important because personal devices are often an attack vector. If you can infect anybody in your C-suite's personal devices, they're often signed into the work account from their personal devices. They're constantly working, and so they have it at home with them, and that can lead to risk because their personal devices is often not nearly as secure as their work device, and so that can often be the initial vector. I think we're over though. For time-wise.
We are. You could obviously probably talk for hours on this. It's
Yeah.
very interesting. I will be getting in touch with you about that platform. That sounds incredible.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you so much, Aidan. This was amazing. Really, really good information. For attendees and, this is shareable. It's not only for attendees, but the links to our YouTube are once again in the chat, just now sharing that. And then you can also find us at www.piai.us, I think, unless we've changed that recently, Pat. Nope, still good. Okay. So yeah, you can go back and rewatch Aidan's presentation. I know I'm planning to do that because it seems like it's going to take a couple of listens to let some of that sink in. Thank you so much, Aidan. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank
It
you,
was
Aidan.
a great time. Thank you for all of your awesome questions, guys, and have a great rest of your day. Actually, before I go, I'm just gonna put my email in chat because a few people have asked for it. So if you want to reach out directly, you can. Otherwise, everyone have a good rest of your day. Take care.